Today we are talking with author and journalist Blaire Briody, the author of the book The New Wild West, Black Gold, Fracking, and Life in a North Dakota Boomtown. Welcome to Redara.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a fascinating book, and it's a very well-researched book, and not only just the research, but also you spend time in that boomtown. Tell us what is the focus of the book, what the book is all about.
Yeah, so the book centers around the town of Williston in northwest North Dakota. And this was a really small farming community back in 2007, 2008. People talk about it, how they wouldn't lock their doors at night. It felt like a safe community to raise a family. And then suddenly, when the U.S. started using fracking to drill for oil, North Dakota became an area where hundreds of companies were coming to drill in that area. And Williston was really in the center of it all. So I spent summer living out there, and I follow about 5 people as they go through this experience. And some of those are newcomers, people who came from other areas of the United States to work in the oil industry or to try to make it in this town. And some are the locals, the farmers or the local Williston residents and how it's impacting them.
Tell us a little bit about Williston, which is the location that is explored in the book, and what it is like living there before the boom, even though Williston has been focus of oil and railroad and people migrating there to find jobs in the past for last 5 decades.
Right. So, yeah, Williston sprang up during the westward migration when they expanded the railroads. So it started out as a boom town, but then, it never really grew beyond being a pretty small Midwestern town. It did experience a few booms in the past, the 1950s, when they first started drilling for oil in the U.S. Williston saw a little bit of an influx of people. And then again in the 80s, but it wasn't nearly to the level of the current boom, and it went bust pretty quickly. So
oil as a commodity is very important to our way of life, and we always are using more and more oil, especially in the last 6-7 decades. And in many ways, our economic prosperity and growth is linked to the oil. But that oil impacts many of us in different ways, those who are especially closer to the point of its origin. And the farmers in North Dakota did not even know or may not have realized that the land that they own may have oil or mineral rights that go with it. They may not be with them. They may be owned by somebody else.
Yeah, that was a really shocking realization that I found out that was going on in this country. What happened is in the 1950s, the state, and this has happened in a few states where oil has been a commodity, and they decided to separate the mineral rights from the surface area rights. So you could, own the land, but you might sell your mineral rights, or when you purchase the land, it might have already been separated. So some people didn't realize that their mineral rights had already been sold, maybe a generation ago, or the previous landowners sold them. And so when the oil companies came to drill on their land, they really had no say. They couldn't tell them to leave. They didn't get royalty payments. They only got a small, one-time use fee for using the farmland. So a lot of farmers were really upset by this. And sometimes, 20 different families owned a plot of land because the mineral rights had been sold and split up so many times. So a lot of farmers were just left with no choice and had to kind of stand by and watch it happen.
So there were many farmers who owned the piece of land, were farming there happily, or struggling with the inclement weather for decades, years.
Right, yeah.
And suddenly they find a stranger knocking on their doors and putting up oil rigs, and they have to just look at it and cannot even be benefiting from it.
Exactly.
We'll talk more about that later. But tell us the population of Williston in North Dakota before 2007 and how it kind of exploded in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I think before the boom, it was about 15,000. And then it went to, I mean, it was hard for them to estimate exactly how many people came because some people would come and, they wouldn't rent a place. They might sleep in their car for 9 months or something. And then they would give up and go home. So it was hard to count exactly how many people came, but I think at the height, about 40, maybe 45,000 people were in Williston.
Mm-hmm. In the
So
book, it almost
tripled.
tripled, yeah. In the book, you cover almost a period between 2007 and 2014, or what time period you're focusing in the book?
I cover between 2007 and then 2015. I kind of talk about the aftermath.
So you kind of cover the boom, or what was going on in the town before the boom, and then the boom, and then of course the collapse of the oil price and steady decline, eventually all the way down in the late 2015 to 16 as well.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Tell us, those who may not understand, what a boom can do to an oil town, or especially a small rural area or a small city. What boom felt like to the local residents, to the state regulators, to the local traffic, to the local grocery supplies, to the local water and sewage system, and the schools and high schools.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it. I mean, it affected every single part of the city and the surrounding area. I mean, everyone felt understaffed. They couldn't hire enough people, especially like the schools and the police department and these services that we kind of take for granted. They simply just didn't have enough people to be able to police or the area, or, enough teachers for the schools. And then you have, with the schools, suddenly there's tons of, there's all these new students that they don't have enough classrooms for. Partly they couldn't build enough housing because they didn't have a large enough sewage and water system to be able to expand that rapidly. So yeah, I mean, pretty much every part of life was affected. There's more traffic, housing costs skyrocketed. Suddenly, people who rented had to move in with family because they couldn't afford to live there. People who had been in the area for a long time and owned, a lot of them ended up selling their home and leaving because they didn't like the changes happening to the town. There was an increase in violence and sexual assault cases. So yeah, a lot of locals, I would say it was split. A lot of locals were really upset by the changes. They left or were really upset by the change in their way of life. But then some also benefited from it. The young people could suddenly come back. They maybe had moved away to cities and now they could come back and have a job and live in Williston again. So some people who could get a job or start a business that was connected to the oil industry benefited from the boom, and they were happy to have it.
And who was attracted to this boom? What kind of people found this boom attractive, and why did they migrate all the way from other parts of the country to this small town that has a very difficult weather, is kind of disconnected from the rest of the world in many ways?
Right. Yeah. Through my research, I found it was mostly working class, blue collar workers, and a lot of them had been laid off in the recession, or they lost their homes in the recession. And with manufacturing jobs, they've been on a steady decline for many years now. So there's these industries that workers are kind of giving up in that industry and now migrating to try to find work elsewhere. And the boom coincided with this. And so once they heard about it, people came from all over the country, as far as Alaska and Hawaii, and then also foreign countries as well.
Giving up the beautiful weather of Hawaii just to go to not Dakota, where
exactly.
The temperatures can drop down to negative 40 degrees. Yep. There must be a real reason.
Yeah, there's a lot of desperation there.
You had a very nice, simple sentence there once where one of the family members came to see one of the oil workers, and they ended up staying in a Super 8 motel that cost $150 a night, which generally would cost $20, $25, $30 a night somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of gives the scale of how the prices escalated in the housing and all the other areas, and they would constantly run out of groceries.
Yeah, the housing prices rivaled New York and San Francisco. A one-bedroom apartment was $2,000 a month.
Give us a little bit more nuanced view of the life in an oil boomtown, or what were the human conditions there, how they kind of degraded, and how some people were living in the campers in the parking lot of the Walmart before they were all moved out of there.
Yeah, that was actually how I heard about this boom, as I read about these workers who were living in Walmart's parking lot. And it reminded me of the tent cities of the recession that I had been reading about, but yet everyone living in this quote unquote tent city had jobs. And that was the main difference. And, people, I talk about some of the parking lots in the city that the police, for a while, they would kind of turn an eye to all these people parking and sleeping in these parking lots. And there was a city park for a while that allowed people to camp there, but they eventually cracked down on that and asked the campers to leave, partly from complaints of the locals. So that people eventually went more to the outskirts of the cities to campgrounds, maybe 15 miles away.
You say very well in the book that the blue-collar workers were becoming the new migrant laborers of the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
Were these people educated? Were they looking for work out of desperation, and that they were willing to separate from their families so that they can just provide the means of living, or they can just save enough to buy their house in their own hometowns?
Yeah, it really was the only industry that was hiring a lot of people, and that they could make a decent living. You could start at $100,000 a year, which would put you, solidly middle class. The downside was you had to work 120 hours a week in some cases. You were separated from your family. There was a lot of instability. You were living in what they call man camps, which was temporary worker, barracks basically for the oil workers.
And you said very well in the book at one point that many of these oil workers were post-military or post-Iraq military people, and they were saying this is our next deployment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the boom also coincided with the withdrawal of many troops. One person even described Williston as a war zone because there's so much industry and development going on and kind of this chaotic atmosphere.
So those who do not know much about the oil or not aware of what oil has to go through before it gets to your car, tell us a little bit about the shale formation and the fracking and the 3 steps that most of the people that you talk about in the book were involved, and then how and what it has to go through before it gets to the tank in your car.
Right. So the traditional method of drilling for oil, the oil was really in these pools underground. And so you almost picture a straw, drill down to the pool, and then extract the oil that way. And that was a lot cheaper. It was very efficient. But those pools had been drying up for years, and oil in the U.S. had just been on a steady decline. So when they realized that fracking they could use fracking to extract oil, that involves drilling down, and instead of a pool of oil, the oil has soaked into the rocks. And so they use high pressure water, and it's water that has a lot of chemical, or not a lot, but it's laced with chemicals. And they use this,
as they call it, slick water.
Slick water, yeah. They call it slick water. And under high pressure, they use that to kind of break apart the rock. And so the oil can seep through, and we're able to extract it that way. And then they pipe it typically we pipe it to a refinery. But in North Dakota, there was very little infrastructure. There was very few pipelines compared to Texas. And so while they were building up a lot of those pipelines, they would truck it to the refineries.
Yeah, and just those who do not understand the significance of all these things is that each drill rig can take about 120 people. And at that time, at the peak, North Dakota had almost 8,500 of the rigs going on at the same time. Never seen the scale before. And the production was higher than the Prudhoe Bay in Alaska.
Right.
What about tell us some of the people that you talk about in the book, and they're very touching and emotional stories, and it kind of touches anybody who reads the book, especially Cindy Marcello. Give us some story about one or two people in the book.
Yeah, Cindy Marcello, she was 50-something grandmother who was living in Utah and had really struggled during the recession. She had her own business, but it fell apart during the recession. She went through a divorce. She was sleeping on her kids' couches. And then she hears about the oil boom and she decides to give it a try. She has no experience in the oil industry. But because it's a boom, they give her a chance. They hire her. And I follow her story of what it was like to be a woman in the oil industry and the discrimination that she faces, the assault that she faces at times. And at one point in her story, she decides to sue a company that she was working for gender discrimination. So she's one. There's also Tom Stakes. He hadn't had a lot of stability in his life, I guess I'll put it that way. He struggled with alcoholism. He was in construction, so he struggled to find stable work. So he came to North Dakota to get a job in the area, kind of hoping to start his life over and start a new life there. But while he's there, he comes with very little. And so he sleeps in his car. He sleeps at a campground. He's trying to find some way to get ahead in this boomtown. And then there's Chelsea, you mentioned her and her husband, Jacob. Jacob gets a job in the oil field. And at first, Chelsea thinks she's just going to stay back in Kentucky while he goes and works in the oil field in North Dakota. But she eventually follows him there with her 5-year-old son. And she tries to live out there, and she lives in a trailer, and kind of wanted to get this perspective of what it's like to be a wife or a partner of somebody in the oil field. And then there's Jay Reinke, who's a pastor in Williston. And he starts this program where he wants the men coming into town, or he lets them stay at the church. He doesn't want this at first, but he decides to let them stay at his church to help them out. But it creates a lot of tension with the church and the town, him allowing these men to stay there. So I follow his story. And then there's also Donnie Nelson.
Yes.
He's a farmer in North Dakota who I think he has 18 wells on his land. I follow kind of his struggles with this. He is getting royalty money, but he didn't want the oil wells there, and just what it's like to live next to the wells and to deal with the truck traffic, the flaring, which is flaring, the natural gas into the atmosphere, all the sort of environmental aspects of living next to these wells. So
Donnie Nelson was one of the persons who was the farmers who had almost 8,000 acres of land and, as you said, somewhere around 20 wells on his property. He was benefiting, but he saw the darker side of the boom as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How would you describe all these people who were attracted to the boom, that they were driven in some ways because of the lack of job or desperation, or were forced into looking for these kind of jobs, but they were living in a very highly unstable situation?
Right. Yeah. With oil, the way it works, it can easily, the price goes up. And then when there's too much supply, the price goes down. And unless there's like an organization like OPEC is helping regulate that, companies will suddenly stop drilling for a while until they're hoping prices will go back up. They'll lay off a bunch of workers. And then when prices go back up, they'll rehire or try to hire some more workers. So there's a lot of instability around the oil field. And even if you decide to bring your family and settle in Williston, the chances of you maintaining your employment for 20, 30 years is very low. So a lot of families struggled with, do we, potentially spend 5, 6 years apart where, the person working in the oil field is only home occasionally? and potentially longer. Like they really just don't know how long it's going to be. Or do we try to move our whole family there to this town and settle and hope for the best, so.
While all these things was going on, the federal government and the political system also was changing, and the OSHA regulation, which is supposed to investigate and regulate and monitor all these activities, were completely outgunned. I think there were less than like 10 or 15 inspectors available for the whole state. Can you tell us more about it and what really was OSHA doing or not doing?
Right. So OSHA is supposed to go inspect these work sites and make sure they're safe. There's all these safety regulations, and the truck can't be this close to this explosive site, and all these things that people are supposed to be following, but they simply didn't have enough inspectors to cover all these new work sites. And so North Dakota became the most dangerous state to work during the boom, and there was a number of really sad, horrific deaths that happened on the oil wells and that could have been prevented.
And also the workers' compensation was also a big issue there.
Right. That's also been something that the state has kind of chipped away at for a while, and that's happening in a number of states as well.
Well, there were a lot more injuries and a lot of people were hurt and burned, and several people were killed as well. But all of these people were reluctant to report these damages or injuries, or even the farmers were not willing to report the accidents. Why was there kind of agreed upon silence?
Well, it can really prevent you from getting rehired at a different company or from keeping your job. If you report accidents, a lot of companies will, they might not say that, but they might, opt for someone else over you. And so a lot of workers, were worried that it would affect their employment if they reported. And some accidents were obvious. You couldn't, just hide it. But especially more minor accidents, I guess, that weren't super serious.
Some of these instances are very severe instances, like you can easily get burned. You could easily have, a hole in your hand if the pressure air gets through it or oil chips through it. And the nearest burn center was almost 60 miles away.
Right. They really weren't prepared for this level of dangerous work happening in the state.
Was there any kind of interest from the state government or local or city governments to improve or beef up the environmental security or worker security related issues?
Not a lot. There really wasn't. And the workers' compensation, that's something the state has really, they've been shrinking the payments. When you do get approved for workers' compensation, they might fight claims. They'll send you, if you get hurt on the site, they'll send you to a medical clinic that has the companies will help try to control the medical decision. So they might have hired the doctors working at those clinics. And then also, they'll have a limited amount of payments. So if you're approved for workers' compensation, those payments might stop before the worker even fully recovers. So those were just some of the ways that workers' compensation was declining.
So when the boom kind of ended and the oil prices started declining down, how did that travel through the Williston community? What happened? Who lost job? People left? How did they leave? How their conditions changed? What happened?
Yeah, so it started with a lot of layoffs and a lot of uncertainty. If you hadn't been laid off, you're worried about it. And a lot of workers left. A lot of people were in denial for a while, especially the company, someone who still had their job, or the locals that were benefiting from the boom. I heard a lot of, this is just temporary. They'll come back, in a few months. And that when that didn't happen, people moved away. And the city had just built, finally, after it took a number of years to get caught up, they had just built a bunch of new homes, a bunch of new apartments, new shopping centers. And right after that, prices fell dramatically. And so the town started to have a little bit of this ghost town, empty feel. I mean, there were certain areas of town, like the central part, that had been there a long time, I would say that, there were still people there, but then when you went to all these new developments, it really felt like a ghost town, and the prices came down. If you wanted a new apartment, suddenly instead of $2,000 a month for one bedroom, it was $600, and you get a signing bonus. You get the first month free if you moved in. Like, the apartment complexes started adding all these perks to try to get people to move in.
Highly uncertain and volatile condition, but it's something that Williston has seen for many, many decades. It has gone through multiple oil boom and bust in last 5 or 6 decades. And also, fracking is not something that was just reinvented recently. It has been going on for many, many decades.
Right. I'm especially fracking for natural gas. I mean, the process has been going on, but it's only recently that it was kind of successfully applied to oil, and they're always finding more efficient ways to extract oil. So yeah, it's definitely not going away. We're continuing to be fracking all the time in the country.
And as you said in the book, that early time it used to cost almost like 60 to 90 days to drill one oil well, but now they've brought it down to almost 9 days of doing that, which is a remarkable improvement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when the bust finally set, as you explain in the book, what happened in the 2015 and 16 to the town and the people that you talk about in the book?
Well, yeah, most people left. Johnny Nelson is still there. Jay Ranke is still there, but everyone else that I follow in the book left. So Tom Stakes, I won't give anything away, but his story kind of continues even after he leaves. Yeah, Cindy Marcello, she left and has struggled to find stable work back in Utah. And same with Chelsea and Jacob. They're back in Kentucky, but the effects of this experience are definitely lasting. And I think that's what I'll say.
So much about the book. Tell us a little bit about you. How did you get attracted to going there from New York City? I'm not going to tell more, but tell us more. What were you doing before you decided to write the book, and why did you write the book?
Yeah, I've been working as a journalist, business news site in New York, and I've been covering a lot of the recession at my job. And then when I heard about the boom in North Dakota, I read about these workers sleeping in Walmart's parking lot, and there really wasn't a lot of coverage at that time. Very few reporters had gone out there. There's a very small newspaper in Williston, but they weren't doing, they didn't have a very big staff, and there just wasn't much national coverage. And so I was trying to find out as much as I could, but I just kept thinking about it and wanted to, I could maybe get a weekend or a couple of days. I could talk to my boss and get a couple of days to go out there and do a quick story. But that's what a few other reporters at different media organizations had been doing. And I really wanted a deeper look at it and wanted to really understand what was happening out there. It just felt like a much bigger story than what other people were reporting it as. It reminded me of the gold rush, national event like that. And so as I was thinking about it, I decided to start a crowdfunding campaign to see if I could get enough interest in this topic to go do live out there over the summer for a research trip. And I had been wanting to write a book, but I wasn't sure if this was it. And so after that crowdfunding campaign, it kind of confirmed that, okay, people are interested in this. I think this could be something. And, I didn't have a book deal at that time, but I decided to give it a chance, and at least I would write some articles about it. And so I ended up leaving my job in New York and moving out there for the summer. I pulled a trailer from California, from my parents' house in California, because I also couldn't find a place to live out there. And even finding a trailer park to park the trailer was difficult. There were like waiting lists to even get a little plot to park your trailer on. So yeah, I brought the trailer out there the summer of 2013 and lived out there for the summer. And then after that, I was able to sell the book based on that book proposal that I wrote.
What was it like living in a town where women were not always treated well, and it was at times dangerous? What did your parents and friends think about it?
Yeah, they were worried. Yeah, and I was scared, especially at first. And I was really happy that, my parents, they offered to help me pull the trailer out there. And even my cousin came out there with me at first. And that really helped me get settled. And then after I met Cindy Marcello, things changed because I was, as a female journalist, I was definitely worried about how to get access to a lot of these male oil workers, but still, stay safe. And, they were working such long hours. It was hard for them to just meet me at a coffee shop. And I didn't really want to just go by myself to their man camp, interview them there. So I remember, struggling with, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get access to this group of people? So once I met Cindy Marcello, she really helped me kind of be my guide into this world. And she would help me recommend people to interview. I got to know her crew, who she trusted. And so that was key, get access as a woman. But I think I also, as a woman, I had access to people who male reporters might struggle more with. I wanted the female perspective of this event. And so people like Cindy Marcello or Chelsea Nihas potentially would have taken them longer to open up to male reporters. So I think there were some advantages, but there are also some disadvantages.
How long it took you to write the book from the summer of 2013 until you published it?
Well, I think total it took me 4 years because I turned in the final draft. Yeah, I guess it was early 2017 or spring 2017. I turned in the final draft. So,
what do you think you learned from the whole experience?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think what I took away from it was just how often parts of the country are ignored and kind of skipped over, especially having grown up in California and living in New York, sort of the liberal coastal cities that we're really not listening or interacting with a lot of areas like Northwestern North Dakota. It almost seems like a foreign area, I think, to a lot of people. And so, one thing that I really took away is that, and I think once we saw the popularity of Trump through the election, that there's this large divide in this country. And I think I really benefited from spending time out there. And I really hope people reading the book, it'll give them a better understanding as well of these areas of the country.
Do you think that the original reasons why you wrote or why you were attracted to or why you were thinking about writing the books, after completing the book, you still feel the same way or you have changed your mind? Or
you mean as far as thinking of it as the gold rush or an event like that?
Yeah, I mean, you were attracted to go there for some reason, and what were they? And then after you finished it, was it the way you thought it would be, or it was totally different, or was it an eye-opener?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, spending a lot of time out there, it starts to become familiar to you. But yeah, when there was at some points when I was shocked that this was happening on American soil and that not everybody was talking about it. I think that was something that really shocked me. Feels like this should be on the front page of every newspaper all the time. So yeah, and there's just, the living conditions out there, I think also shocked me, just how the desperation you could feel, and the, people living in trailers with very little heat, sometimes they had no running water, and they were far, 45 minutes from any services or anything like that. So yeah, I think the aspects like that were very surprising to me. And then also how little regulation there was, especially with the environmental aspects. I mean, there was a spill every single day in North Dakota, and, a lot of the regulators just they wouldn't investigate. They wouldn't really fine the companies. It was just kind of like, well, this is what happened. So that part also shocked me.
Do you ever think about, or did you ask these people when you were there, that these were the people who were very upset with the unions and upset with a lot of regulations, and they were working in an industry where they virtually had no protections if they got hurt or burned or damaged. And yet they wanted those kind of conditions going on again and again.
Yeah.
And why?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was definitely this anti-union feel out there. I think a lot of people had either seen others, like their parents, the way they interpreted what happened in like manufacturing or some other industries that were once strong in unions. They kind of blamed the unions as a reason that their parents were laid off, or maybe they were laid off. And so I would say that most of people's attitude was kind of like, this is what you get. This is what comes with a job that pays well.
But the overall country has benefited a lot from the enormous amount of oil that we have discovered and we actually have explored and brought it to the market. Overall, we all consumers use the oil that is a cheap oil. But do you think the same way when you put that oil in the gasoline in that tank, that there's a lot that has gone into it before it got here?
Exactly. And I think we would benefit if we thought about it more. We thought about where it's coming from. And yeah, when gas, you're filling up your car and you're like, oh, that's so great. Gas is cheap. But what does that mean? And who is affected by all these changes? So yeah, I hope that's what people take away from reading the book, is I hope they are able to think more about it when they're filling up their tank.
And may not use as much if you don't need it.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Tell us more. Are you working on any other projects, or you're still continuing with this project, or you're considering to write a book on any other topics?
Well, yeah, right now I'm taking a break from writing books. I'm still doing a book tour for this book, and I probably won't jump into another long 4-year project like this for a while, but I'll be working on like long form features, writing for magazines and websites, and doing freelance writing. So yeah, I'm kind of taking on some smaller projects that won't take 4 years right now.
We've been talking with Blaire Briody, the author of The New Wild West, Black Gold, Fracking, and Life in a North Dakota Boomtown. Thank you very much for your time, and please do keep us in mind if you write another book.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.